One of the best and still highly underrated Star Wars projects since Disney bought Lucasfilm is Andor. The show is a complex look at the very act of rebellion, of sacrifice, and of the price and cost of freedom. It grounds the Rebel Alliance and offers a stark contrast to the idealism presented in the original Star Wars trilogy. One episode perfectly encapsulated this within two separate moments, when Kino Loy heartbreakingly declares that
Can't swim. What? What did he say? Can't swim.
and Luthen Rael's powerful monologue about his role within the rebellion.
I've given up all chance at inner peace. I made my mind a sunless space.
If you need a thesis for the show itself, then these two moments are it. The personal cost, the personal sacrifice, and the personal betrayal of yourself that rebellion does to a person. It's a perfect sequel to Rogue One, and brilliantly expands upon the sometimes overt and clumsy themes it tries to get across of sacrifice without remembrance, and losing yourself within a cause. Now stick with me here, I know I just gushed about Andor, but this is still about Outlaws, because whilst Andor perfectly encapsulates a different side of the rebellion, I think that Outlaws almost, and I really stress almost, it almost perfectly encapsulates an entirely different side of the Star Wars universe.
I get all worked up. Silly. It's a party.
Whilst the Underworld itself is not a new premise to the franchise, and one that is increasingly moving towards in the age of the anti-hero, Outlaws manages to capture an innocence and uniquely Star Wars charm that shows like The Mandalorian and The Book of Boba Fett don't really attempt. Outlaws isn't a fresh take on a decades-old franchise like Mando was, nor is it a total rewrite of a fan-favourite character to mostly disastrous consequences. Outlaws tells the story of new character, alongside familiar faces from both shows, films, comics, and books that weaves through its more mature themes through the coming-of-age narrative of Kay Vess. It's not a grimdark story akin to something like the cancelled 1313, but rather it fully embraces the lighter tone of the original trilogy, whilst allowing darker or more mature moments to have some edge without fully tipping the scales over into outright darkness. At the core of this story are Kay and Nix, the two playable characters, the Doi. But the game doesn't wander off the beaten track like with most Ubisoft open world games. Instead, it allows the two of them to follow their own narrative without major distractions baked into the story. Each planet has a series of main missions that all follow the same path: find the crew member, find their problem, solve their problem. Whilst there are some variations here and there, it follows a classic 3-out structure throughout. I bring this up first because this is the weakest part of the game. The part of the game where Kay and Nix are more put into the background narratively, and we get the bare minimum character development for the supporting cast, which is fine because they're really putting the work into making ND5 an actual character. I'm getting ahead of myself now though. The actual main story chunk of the game is very standard, and you may be saying, well, if the main chunk of the story isn't great, then why do you like it? And I'm glad you asked that, viewer, thank you. I like the story because of the other 2/3 of the game. You see, whilst the main part of the game is these missions, the actual really good story stuff mostly happens at the start and the end. And that stuff is really bloody good. Or at least, I found it good enough for me to keep my attention, and not have me constantly frustrated and annoyed that a random Jedi could fight Darth Vader to their victory. I digress. The opening to the game can be a little sloppy. I think pacing-wise, opening up with Slero was the wrong move. The game properly starts with Kay waking up from a dream, a perfect moment for the flashback we get right around the time when the title card shows up. Seriously, put this flashback at the start and Slero's villain speech right before the title card, and I think that the opening to the game improves by around 20%, because it instantly sets the tone for who Kay is as a person, scrappy but prone to failure, as most good scoundrels are. She's been stealing and running from authority from a young age, and doing so at the behest of her mother, whilst her surrogate father figure in Bram watches on with caution and judgment. Her mother also seems more interested in teaching her harsh lessons about her view of the galaxy, rather than raising her, which then perfectly contrasts Kay's approach to her friends, to Bram, and to taking risks throughout the entire opening section. All of this would have been amazing to learn right at the start, as we also have the lingering question of why Kay's mother isn't in the picture. Instead, the first thing we're given is a rather generic meeting between the major cartels, as well as a power struggle between them and a new syndicate. This doesn't tell us anything about the actual interesting story, but rather works to serve as setting the stakes, something that would have worked much better after Kay had already gone to rob them. I'm focusing a lot on this because it instantly sets the wrong expectation for the audience. That being, we're going to get a lot of political action around the cartels and their dealings, when in reality that's a minor thing to the main story of Kay finding out who she is and what she wants in her life. After that intro cutscene, we don't see Slero properly until 30 minutes into the game, and by then we already know how menacing and powerful he is. Killing representatives of the 3 major factions in the underworld is a strong move, so we have no build-up over the first time Kay meets him that he is an incredibly dangerous man. Now if you put the flashback first, Kay has escaped and freed the rebels, and we see Slero interrogating the agents of the underworld for answers and killing them after his evil monologue. We get a true sense of how powerful he and his organisation are, and then we go to the opening title. Perfection. It's an incredibly tiny thing, but it's something that I thought a lot about, because the opening stuff with Kay actually sets her up really solidly, but it just felt poorly laid out because we aren't on the same page with her in this narrative until after the flashback at what is essentially the end of the intro. Kay's life on Canto Bight, her relationship with Brown and the residents, as well as the routine she's gotten into and the trouble she's in with the local gang, all sets her character up to a scoundrel that we can easily love. We see her quickly get in over her head in a very Han Solo way and attempt to bluff and fight her way out of situations. Nyx does a great job in humanising her as well and showing her heart without forcing her to give up credits. It positions the two of them as a crime duo that work together and look out for each other, which translates brilliantly over into gameplay, something I very much appreciate. When you're leaving Canto, you've robbed every place you knew, burned all your contacts, got a death mark on your head, and stolen a ship with nowhere to go but the galaxy. It's an incredibly compelling opening, especially since by the end of it, you've already fulfilled Kay's entire life goal up to that point. Her only purpose was to get off Canto, get rich, and live her life stress-free. It's an incredibly naive goal because it's one that you know will never be possible, not just in the Star Wars universe, but any universe. And it's a goal that is shared by the best protagonists in the franchise. Anakin, Luke, Rey all seek to leave their planets and go on to something better. In their cases, it's to cause irreparable harm to the galaxy, but with Kay, all she really wants is the freedom to have a life and make the choices she wants to, one that is inherently appealing to everybody, because everyone wants that same freedom. That's where ND5 comes in as an excellent foil to that.
Who are you?
Run. I said, run.
Enslaved twice over, once by the separatist army that built him, and then again to Jalen, ND5 has decades of experience out in the galaxy, and knows how stories like Kay's end before she's even started it. He starts off annoyed by her optimism and blasé attitude, where she believes she's the best thing to happen to the crime lord you're going to ask for help. Within the game itself, he's constantly giving advice, little snippets of banter, and slowly, over your actions through the story, thaws in his approach to you. He gives you unprompted wisdom and makes sure Kay understands that the galaxy, the Empire, and working with cartels changes people, and not to so blindly put her trust in those that she doesn't truly know the motivations of. It's a lesson Kay knows from her mother, but not one she really absorbed, because early on she's betrayed by a character named Waka.
Waka waka!
The game positions Waka to an identical position for ND5, and whilst his betrayal was obvious to me, it wasn't all that obvious to Kay, and when it does happen, she's shocked, and only saved because of the Death Mark and the Bounty Hunter Veil. ND5 then comes in to fill Waka's space, but also with the express interest of keeping Kay alive. This means you can go through the game without the same tension of betrayal on the ship, but always be wary of him and anyone you pick up because of that initial betrayal. I think Tashara is mostly forgettable from a story perspective, but I do think it works incredibly well as a tutorial to that, and to some of the themes of the underworld as a whole. I also think that the game doesn't truly start until you get ND5, because that's where the story starts to take a back seat to the open world elements, and where most of it comes through dialogue lines in the open world and the fairly repetitive main missions.
You might live long enough to complete the job this time.
It's not just in these dialogue lines that make ND5 a more unique character, but it's because he is just the only one apart from Jalen to really push back against Kay's vision for her future. Throughout the entire game, Kay is committed to pulling off this big heist, taking her chunk of credits and disappearing to live out her days in harmony with Nyx, and do whatever she wants. ND5 challenges this throughout the key sections of the story, not only on the validity of it, but if it's actually what she wants. He shows her how little she knows about the galaxy, but he also experiences things like Kay seeing Akiva's water and verdity for the first time through a new lens, similarly to how Rey did with Takodana.
You've never been somewhere this verdant.
There is a sense that the relationship between them could be akin to something like Han and Chewie if ND5 didn't have that restraining bolt on him. And there's this sense throughout her dialogue with ND5 that Kay is thinking similarly. While she says that she's better off with just her and Nix because of what happened with her mother, Kate easily builds a small pseudo-family within the game that she clearly becomes attached to. Ankh and Gadik aren't fleshed out enough for my liking, but it's clear through dialogue lines in the game that they've formed a strong relationship, even in the short time they've come together. It's a classic trope, but god do I love it because it's so effective in breaking a character down. And Kate isn't really looking for credits to disappear because that's just what she feels like in relation to her mother. Instead, what she wants are people who care about her and who she cares for in return. And we see that bond form with ND5, not only in the main mission, but also in side quests. My favourite of which is the Veteran Expert mission. That does a lot for ND5's character, but also for his and Kay's relationship. Whenever ND5 pushes back against Kay's resolution to say she just wants this to all be over so she could do what she wants, he rightfully calls her out that she doesn't have any idea about that. Whilst on Tatooine and tracking down Hoss, she asks him if this is how people like him end up, a path Kay is quickly going down because of her death mark from Zerek Besh, and is disheartened to hear that it is. For people like ND5 and Hoss, there isn't really an end path that leads into that future Kay envisions for herself. And that's what ND5 serves as, a literal slave to the criminal underworld with chains that he can't break by himself. So now we get into it, the end. I assume I put a spoiler warning up at the start, but even so, if you care about spoilers, then get out now because I'm going to do it. Okay, so after completing all of the crew gathering missions, ND5 breaks down, mostly, and you rush to fix him. The level itself is excellently designed and has a few good twists and turns in it. ND5 shows true vulnerability for the first time, and some of the acting from Humberly and Jay really sell that they're not just working together, but truly genuinely friends that care for each other. Kay puts her life quite literally on the line, and whilst we get hints about her larger conspiracy with Zerek Besh, the true point of this is to continue to build upon that relationship with ND.
Gadik!
Let go!
It's then so heartbreaking that after we fixed ND5, we agreed to instead with Kay's absentee mother, whom Jalen brought in to get the job done. ND5 seemingly knows the impact this would have on Kay, and feels guilty despite it not being his fault.
I told him not to.
It's a small moment, but really compelling, especially with the emotion in the scene and the obvious lead up into the end of the game. There was also a sense from me that things were heading to a messy conclusion. Rico was clearly brought on to unbalance Kay and make her not view things in a correct light, and I think that's what ND5 is apologising for. At the start of the game, he knew that eventually he was going to have to betray Kay, but he didn't expect to bond with her. It's something Jalen brings up as well, that ND5 is...
Now he's quite the believer in Kay Vess.
And I think it's only at this point in the game that ND5 realises that Kay's nature will mean that things won't go smoothly. As the game starts to build to its climactic finale, we're given a deeper insight into all of the major characters. Rico is turned from a two-dimensional figure of Kay's path into a more complex character. Throughout the ISB base infiltration, she's acting as quite a literal protective figure over Kay, but because of the nature of their relationship, it means she makes mistakes, forcing Kay to fix it. It's a tense mission, not just because of the in-universe reason of infiltrating what is essentially the space pentagon, but because of how Kay and Rico play off each other, both wanting that familial connection, but both unable to move past their shared and individual trauma to form a meaningful bond. Eventually, Rico leaves Kay at a critical point in the mission, which is evocative of their entire relationship, and Kay's foundational moments. And whilst it's a little cliche, Kay's almost slip into calling her by their familial bond, rather than by her name, it's truly a sign that Kay herself cannot separate that relationship like it seems Rico has. The entire section is Kay almost showing off to Rico in a way to prove that she was wrong to leave her on Canto Bight, that Kay both needed her and didn't need her to thrive in the same environment and profession that Rico is in. This continues throughout the heist as well, as we see Kay cleanly and easily interact with all of the members of the crew to almost simply make the heist go smoothly. In fact, Kay's actions and personality are the entire reason the crew wasn't killed when Sliro and Vale cut near the end of the heist.
Anything you're waiting for?
No. I've decided.
And even though that entire segment is a classical scoundrel negotiation, it's indicative of what Kay and the game is about. Freedom. Vale herself is trapped within the deal Sliro and Zerek Besh have set up, and Kay's mercy and willingness to work with her during the Tatooine missions give Vale that confidence to break free of Sliro's manipulations. It's why, after the heist is done, that Rico's obvious yet inevitable betrayal
Curse your sudden but inevitable betrayal!
can be quite heartbreaking, because Kay isn't just looking for her own freedom from the Death Mark, but the freedom from Crew and the rebel cell on Akiva. It's selfishness tempered with humanity, the best traits of a scoundrel, and it's something that Rico didn't teach Kay, because it's only something that comes from her connection with others, like Nix and Bram. Rico puts herself and her freedom first, which is why she feels the need to betray Kay and side with Jalen. Even if we do find out that Rico does help indirectly, she helps way less than characters that have only known Kay for a shorter time. If the heist is the dramatic conclusion for Sliro, then the boss fight with ND5 is the emotional core of the game. It's the game telling you what it's all about, what it's been about the entire time if you haven't been paying attention. Freedom, and the ups and downs that come along with it. That's what makes the final boss of the game possibly one of the best I've played for a long time. It's tense and it's emotional, and whilst there isn't any doubt what will happen, it doesn't make the ending any less because of it. It's a very surface level look at trying to break a friend out of a toxic relationship, one that is not only hurting them, but causing them to lash out at those around them, but obviously with like lasers and stuff. There are a lot of plans going into it, and all with the intent of letting ND5 have the freedom to make his own choices, no matter what they are, and it takes quite literally shooting him to snap him out of it.
Me too!
Then when given the chance, ND5 doesn't wait to make the choice to kill Jalen and free himself for good, as well as everyone on the crew. It's something I like about the major deaths in this game. They're quick, there isn't any long-winded speech or final moment, they're shot, they fall over, time to move on. There's a constant sense of mortality within the game that this creates. Waka helps set this up quite a bit, and it continues even with the supposed larger characters of Sliro and Jaden. Whilst these are villainous figures, they're not mythical, they're just mortal. No force abilities to save them, just wit and guile. And in the end, their greed and demand to put everyone else above themselves is what dooms them to a quick death.
You always did it.
The final moment of the game is fairly tame after that. Catharsis in every sense of the word. Blowing up a Star Destroyer was really nice as well, but it's more about sticking it to the Empire rather than any deep story moment. Though there is an argument that it's showing off both the positives and negatives of having the freedom to choose. It means you choose both your enemies and your friends. But in the end, there's a sense that the story itself has come to a close.
Let's get out of here.
The remaining cutscenes all show how everyone now has a chance to pull their own schemes, play their own lot. Kadik and Ank go off to scam casinos, Bram continues his quiet life, Vale gets a chance to start her own crime syndicate, and Kay, ND5 and Nix all decide to continue travelling together. It's a fairly standard ending, but it focuses on the thing that's most important to these characters, and in a way does something very similar to Andor. The ending of Andor itself is only actually the start of Cassian's road to becoming a rebel spy. He sends off his friends, but decides to follow the message of his adoptive mother and give hell to the Empire. We know where his story ends. But the ending of that season is really more about Cassian accepting what he wants and who he is. Whilst it's not as nuanced as that, Outlaws spends its final moments sending that same message. With everything behind her, experience gained, connections formed, and a thrilling quest and impossible heist completed, Kay isn't that same scrappy scoundrel from the start looking to run away from everything. She faces her past, acknowledges her mother and offers an olive branch, but also moves on with her new family, Nix and ND5, where they can find their next purpose together.
So, where do we go next?
Anywhere we want, Andy.